Welcome to Withdraw Consent. I'm Jack. We're joined today again by Gerron to talk about what's going on in Syria. Welcome back.
Good to be back.
So basically, we're not gonna go into the fine details of everything, but we're just gonna talk about how ridiculous the situation is. And so basically, there was a civil war that started 13 years ago after a U.S. Special. What was it? How would you describe it? Like the Timber Sycamore.
Mm,
It was like a CIA operation, basically.
yeah.
You know, and then it was a complete failure. And so let me just go back before the Civil War real quick, okay? So in 2001, General Wesley Clark saw the memo that said, right, 10 days after 9/11, that said that they were going to take out, the U.S. was going to take out 7 countries in the next 5 years. Of those countries, Syria and Iran are the only ones left that haven't been toppled. Now Syria's been toppled. But basically, 13 years ago, the Civil War starts. And when I was telling Victor about this story, I said, okay, so 13 years ago, the Syrian Civil War started. And he said, wait, let me stop you right there. Is this Syrians fighting Syrians or is this Syrians fighting us? You know what I'm saying? Because
hmm
like that's your first inclination. And the answer is, for the most part, it's not Syrians fighting Syrians. Would that be correct? Would you agree with that?
Mostly.
Mostly. The Syrians
It's
who are fighting against the Syrians, the few Syrians who are doing that, are supported en masse by foreign forces
hmm
and foreign funding, of course, you know? So basically, this started. Well, how about you come in and talk about who's on what side, which countries are supporting which side?
Sure. So the main forces is going to be the FSA, the Free Syrian Army. That's your anti-Assad opposition, your typical like rebel movement. But with the Free Syrian Army, they were supported by a lot of like terror groups like Al Qaeda, Al Nusra. Um, Basically, their main official goal was to overthrow Assad, turn Syria into a quote unquote democracy. On the other side, you had the Syrian Arab Republic, or in Syrian Arab Army that was under Bashar al-Assad, and those are your two main factions. You also have in the northern part of Syria, you have the Kurds, um, the YPG, or who are trying to form an independent Kurdish state called Rojava. Now, Rojava's biggest enemy is Turkey, and that explains a lot of why Turkey is indirectly involved in the conflict. You also have ISIS. You probably remember them. They kind of just popped up out of nowhere, and they were all of a sudden driving Toyotas. And ISIS is a completely different type of group. The Islamic State of Iraq and Syria. It's not like Al Qaeda. It's not really a sort of subversive organization. It's a full-on unconventional state with borders that are very fluid, we'll just say. And they're hardcore Islamic extremists, but their entire, like how they rose to power is extremely questionable. You also have Israel. They've essentially been at war against Syria since 1948, since they came into existence, because, I mean, Syria even existing is seen as a threat to Israel, kind of like with Palestine. And as of October 20th, I believe, 2015, the Russians have also been involved on the side of Syria. They're Syria's closest ally. And they were able to set up a couple military bases in Latakia and Tartus, which essentially, up until the Russians recaptured Sevastopol in Crimea, it was basically Russia's only warm water port. And up until recently, they've been probably the single strongest force. The Russians from the air, although there have been ground forces, and the Syrian Arab Army on the ground for both eliminating ISIS and maintaining some semblance of control over the Syrian government. So that's a brief introduction. Go ahead.
Okay, so from my understanding, one of the reasons why Russia is very interested in Syria is because they need that access to the Mediterranean Sea out of the Black Sea, correct?
Absolutely.
Okay, but what do you know if there's any ideological similarities between Bashar al-Assad and Vladimir Putin?
Definitely. They're both really, they're, a lot of people would call them despotic or authoritarians. That's to an extent true. And historically, Russia and everywhere in the Middle East has always not only had, but required a really strong leader who like the whole idea of democracy and like these elections that's so popular in the West is totally foreign to these sort of societies. Both of them also, they're relatively, regardless of what people might say, they're relatively have relative freedom of religion under these various regimes. And as for Christians in particular, Russia is a very, generally speaking, Christian country, and then Syria is actually there. There's more, I believe there's more Christians in Syria than in any other Middle Eastern country, except possibly Egypt, which is kind of interesting. But generally, the biggest similarity that they have is that they have shared military interests, and they both they're good strategic partners for each other. With Russia having Syria there, Syria maintains a lot more stability in the region than, say, if it were under a bunch of different factions.
Okay, when you were talking about the different forces who's supporting who, you mentioned that Al Qaeda was in the group that wanted to establish a democracy there. How does that make sense?
Shared interests, and there's a lot of stuff like Al Qaeda. I mean, both of them oppose Assad. Both of them oppose any kind of stability in that region. And when there's instability, it makes it a lot easier for the Western powers, be that Israel, the United States, or Europe, to kind of come in and destabilize that region. And also, given Iran's, they're not, I wouldn't say Iran and Syria are allies, but they do have a shared interest, especially in opposition to the Zionist entity in the region. Okay.
So basically the war was pretty stalemated for a pretty long time, right?
Mm-hmm.
At one point, the rebel forces, because it's not a civil war, I don't think. Would you classify it as a civil war? It's got so much foreign influence and Turkish fighters in there.
I mean, I'd say yes, it is, because essentially a civil war just means that there's two or more factions that are fighting over control of a single government. But the issue with this one is it's not two factions. It's like between 5 to 100 different factions fighting for it. And they don't all have the same goal, but the main factions do.
But would you say that the majority of the opposition forces are foreigners? Or no? Would you guess, if you were guessing?
I would guess yes.
So then that's an invasion, though. That's traitors in a country. Do you know what I'm saying?
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Because there's all Turkish ultra nationalists in there. There's people Uzbekians. There's all types of stuff in there. You know,
all over. Yeah.
Yeah. And so basically, like one time, what happened historically is that the rebels took northeast Aleppo, which is one of the bigger cities, 2.3 million people at its height, and so the Russians came in and bombed them, and then Assad took back Aleppo, and then this kind of snowballed when they took Aleppo. Right now, the rebels did, but I also feel like it was because Russia couldn't support them because they were so spread so thin in Ukraine. Do you agree or disagree?
I'd say that definitely plays a big part in it. And one other point I'd like to clarify, because you mentioned that there's a bunch of foreigners in there. Some people might object and say that the Russians or Iranians or other groups are also foreigners, but the difference is that in Russia's case, they were specifically invited in by the Assad regime or the Assad government in order to support them.
Right. But nobody's making the claim that Russia's invading Syria.
Exactly.
Because he's helping the people who are Syrian, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so Netanyahu did a video where he took credit for a lot of this because since Iran was helping Assad, that was Hezbollah from Lebanon helping Assad. And because of Netanyahu's airstrikes in Lebanon against Hezbollah, the pagers thing and the disruption of their leadership there, he's taking credit because Hezbollah couldn't help fight off the invading force in Syria. Do you agree with that?
Yeah.
Okay. So then basically, so his regime falls pretty quick, right? They take Aleppo, they take Damascus after a long war. This is a 50-year regime, including him and his father, right? And so let's talk about what happens right after that, because this is real telling in my opinion, right? So we have the U.S. and Israel doing wild airstrikes in Syria, right? This is
Crazy.
violation of international law, right?
Absolutely.
No matter what, the Syrian people still have sovereignty. And like, say we say, okay, the United States or Israel is going to bomb a facility, an ammo depot, right? But that ammo belongs to the Syrian people, right?
Yep.
And whatever administration they're going to put in, that belongs to them for their self-defense. So, in my opinion, what Israel and the United States doing is very illegal.
For sure.
And they're doing it on behalf of the United States' best interest. No, Israel, right? Because they just don't want weapons near their border, right? And then basically, Netanyahu has now invaded the rest of the Golan Heights, right? Because he had part of it, which he occupied, and then Trump annexed it to him. Only 2 countries in the entire world recognize this annexation, and that's the United States and Israel. 100% of other countries don't recognize it as being real. So then the rest of the Golan Heights was governed by a 1974 treaty after the Yom Kippur War against Syria, where they said, it's going to be like a buffer zone, and we're going to both have troops in there. So as soon as Syria falls, like, Israel's ready. Their troops are already coming across the border, and they're like, "Oh, you can't patrol this border, so now we need to take more land for Greater Israel. We'll just guard it. Right? How long do you think? Just a serious question. How long do you think it's going to take in years before they say Jewish settlers in this new area? It just has kind of rural Muslims in it.
Oh, I mean, depending on how fast they move, it could be next month.
Because people forget so quick, and then it's, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
The illegal settlements is not big news. And so then when this whole thing dies off, and now we're talking about, Taiwan again or something like that, to start moving in settlers. It's highly predictable because they've done it in every area, right?
Yeah. And one other thing I'm curious of is how the new administration coming in is going to handle it. Because I think it was a video or just an article of Miriam Adelson basically bragging that she offered Trump a certain amount of money. And in exchange, she was basically saying he promised he'd do whatever it took in order to give Israel the Golan Heights, because that was like at the top of her list of priorities.
Right.
So.
Okay, let's talk. Okay, so basically, the leading group right now in Damascus is an Al-Qaeda breakoff, which is called HTS, right?
That's right.
So basically in Damascus, the guy in charge is Abu al-Julani, who is a member of HTS, which is a breakaway group from Al-Qaeda. So he used to be in Al-Qaeda, and he did all types of massacres, and now he has a $10 million bounty on his head from the United States. And basically, he's saying he changed. He's saying that he's now wants to protect minorities. When he did the massacres, he was young, so forgive him. They got him dressed up like Zelensky, right? And so basically the United States and Israel are trotting out to you an Al-Qaeda terrorist, right, who's currently wanted, and they're trying to rehabilitate his image, right?
They've never done anything like that before.
That's funny. But this is just so absurd. It's just so obvious, Okay. Go ahead.
Oh, it's interesting too, because that's exactly what happened with Osama bin Laden when they were training the Mujahideen to fight the Soviets in Afghanistan. So this is nothing new. And the same thing too with kind of how Hamas first came into being, with essentially Israel giving them money, weapons, support in order to create kind of a division within the Palestinian groups.
Yeah, they were supporting him just before the October 7th thing. They were already still supporting him. Okay, so you want to talk about the impact on Russia losing these bases?
Yeah, so Russia, like I mentioned, has 2 bases. One's a naval base, or they're both like air and naval bases. So Tartus and Latakia, these are both right on the Syrian coast, just north of Lebanon, between Lebanon and Turkey. So I would argue that Russia's single largest objective in both the Syria conflict and in Ukraine is to have access to a warm water port. Now, currently they have Sevastopol in Crimea, and they have, other smaller ports along that region, kind of along the Black Sea. But also, they can't get into the Mediterranean at all unless, even if they conquered all of Ukraine, because Turkey's sitting right there and they control the Bosphorus Straits. And I mean, they can, but they have to go through Turkey in order to do so. And Turkey, historically and even up till today, has been a major rival of Russia, and it's also part of NATO. So essentially, what this does is it cuts Russia off entirely from launching any ships directly into the Mediterranean Sea, which is really potentially going to impact their future and really back them into a corner.
Okay, I have this idea, and I just want to pitch it to you, and you tell me if it sounds absurd. If it does, just tell me, right?
Okay.
But imagine this: if in 2001, General Clark saw the memo saying that, and this is all for Israel's behalf, that these 7 countries have to be toppled in 5 years, right?
Mm-hmm.
Every single one of them is just for Israel, right? And there's 2 left. So look, the 5 years comes and goes. Now we're at 2006, right?
Yep.
So if you look, we're 18 years past that now. And they still haven't toppled Syria, right? So this is a difficult thing to do, we can assume, right? What if the entire point of supporting the war in Ukraine for the United States through Jewish influence to get the United States to support the war in Ukraine against the United States' best interest is to weaken Russia to the point that they can't support Syria just to get Syria to fall? Is that too far-fetched?
Not at all. I'd agree with that. I'd also say it might be kind of the opposite to an extent, because Ukraine is strategically, well, I'd say they both work hand in hand, because I mean, Syria is really important to at least have it not be under a strong government in order for Israel.
For Israel, okay.
Go ahead.
No, I didn't know for who. For Israel. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah. And also same thing with Ukraine. There's also have you heard of the new Khazaria idea?
No, not at all. I'm interested though.
So we'll do an episode on this at some point about Khazaria. Khazaria was a medieval empire it lasted basically around 800 to 1000 AD until it got defeated by the Kievan Rus shortly before they Christianized. This empire was the largest empire in Europe at the time, and it was Jewish, Talmudic Jewish. These people weren't Jews ethnically, they were Turkic, from a lot of different Turkic tribes under the control of the Khazars, which were, Turks. But
not the kind of ethnic Turks we think of today.
Yeah, they're not.
Yeah,
they're not the exact same people. They're like distant cousins.
Yeah,
basically. But basically, this region occupied all of what's now Ukraine and most of what's Western Russia and a little bit into the Caucasus before the Slavs and the Arabs from the south kind of eventually conquered them. But there's a theory that I've heard from numerous sources that says like they want to recreate this new Khazaria essentially, so a Jewish super state in what's now Ukraine, which makes it's interesting just given how many Jewish figures there are in the Ukrainian government, including the president. And the city of Dnipro, that city that just got hit by that hypersonic missile, it has the world's largest synagogue in it, shaped like a menorah. So the theory I've heard is that they eventually want to make us like a land bridge from Israel to Ukraine in the distant future. But at the very least, there's a connection there between Ukraine and Israel.
Wow, I did not know that. That's amazing. I got to Google that synagogue though. That
yeah,
looks like that's pretty funny. But this is an interesting concept because it's an extension beyond Greater Israel.
Mm-hmm.
But it's just political power because it wouldn't be actual Jews, right? Oh no, it wouldn't be ethnic Jews, but it would be religious Jews.
Exactly. Yeah, religious Jews.
Okay. So what other points on the Syria conflict are we going to cover? What about Turkey? Turkey. I understand the part about Kurds, but what because they're incredibly motivated.
Yeah, so the Kurds are unique in the sense that they're kind of like the Assyrians and a few other groups of people in that region. They don't have their own state. It's a bunch of ethnic. So the Kurds are. I don't think anyone knows for sure exactly who they're descendants of, but the closest I've seen is the ancient Medes, and the Medes are the ancient empire that got conquered by King Cyrus and the Persians back 500 BC roughly. So these people don't have a state, but they've always been at odds with the Turks, more or less, especially when the Turks moved in the Middle Ages, and they've always been kind of a thorn in the side of the Turks.
But why is it a religious difference?
I think it's more ethnic and just ethnic clashes. Okay. They are Muslim, but they're not the same. I don't think they're the same branch.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd have to look a little more into it.
And so, what are Turkey's other motivations? Like, what threat was Bashar al-Assad to them?
So Erdogan, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, he's a tyrannist. A tyrannist. Turan is an ancient Turkic concept. It's kind of like the idea of pan-Slavism, or even the Greater Israel idea, where they want to basically recreate a historic, greater empire that's based on something in the past. In this case, the Ottoman Empire. Now, that region was part of the Ottoman Empire for a really long time. Turkey also has a very close ally, its closest ally, Azerbaijan, which is between Russia and Iran. And guess what Azerbaijan's closest ally in the Middle East is?
Israel?
Yep.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, Israel's funded like a really, I don't know the exact numbers, I can look it up, but they have a significant influence in the Azeri military. And also Azerbaijan and Iran hate each other. Armenia also is right between Turkey and Azerbaijan. And let's see, and Azerbaijan invaded part of Armenia, Artsakh, last year. And why is this significant? Because the leader of Azerbaijan has already mentioned in the past, Ilham Aliyev, that they want to create a land bridge from Azerbaijan to Turkey because they're separated by a little region in Armenia. So yeah, it basically creates a tapestry of geopolitical alliances. So you got Russia and Syria on one side, you have Turkey, Azerbaijan, and I would say Israel, because Erdogan's come out numerous times against Netanyahu. I can't think of any time Turkey's actually done anything against Israel. I mean, they might have in the past, and they've obviously supported other countries that have.
Right.
But Turkey isn't like it's never been directly at war or anything with Israel the way Syria or Egypt have been.
Right. What about Al Qaeda? Like I watched Jimmy Dore. Do you watch Jimmy Dore?
I've watched a little bit.
Okay, well, I like him, because I like to hear different points of view. I don't agree with everything, but he says, if Al Qaeda dislikes Israel so much, then how many times have they attacked Israel?
Exactly, and same thing with ISIS.
Okay, the same thing with ISIS. And so here's what I don't understand. What if you just made the conspiracy theory that Israel had created or funded Al Qaeda and ISIS, right?
They'd never do that.
Okay, but imagine that's the case. But imagine it's also their goal to get Iraq to fall back in the day.
Mm-hmm.
So why would Al Qaeda and all these, if Israel's behind them, why would they resist us taking down Iraq if that's in Israel's best interest? This is the one part I can't figure out. Unless that wasn't Al Qaeda resisting us and that was just nationalist Iraqis, or I don't know.
I mean, yeah, so it was mostly, I think, yeah. Are you referring to when we first toppled Saddam Hussein?
No, I'm talking about the resistance that came after that.
Right.
So those, and stuff like that.
Yeah, from my understanding, those are mostly there's a lot of different factions in Iraq too. It's a lot like the case with Syria. So Iran and Iraq, Iran's probably the most anti-ISIS out of any of these groups. Same thing with Hezbollah. So the biggest reason Al-Qaeda would be fighting Americans or other occupations, it's not that we're allied with them or anything. It's more like they're just a convenient sort of they're not a direct proxy or anything like that. It's more like kind of like when the Germans in World War I, when they sent Lenin back to the Soviet Union, it wasn't that Lenin or the Bolsheviks were allied with Germany. It was that they were so desperate in that case to knock Russia out of the war because of just how many losses they were getting to them, that they were willing to do anything. And they even made a comment of, we've basically just unleashed a chemical weapon in Russia. It's going to backfire on us one day, but for now, it does what it does. That's kind of how these terrorist groups operate.
Okay, that's a really great analogy, because that really came to bite him in the butt, I'll just say, in about 20, 25 years, right?
Yeah.
So another thing I wanted to go over was Bashar al-Assad, right?
Mm-hmm.
He's this terrible, terrible guy, you know, and he's just this most evil person in the world. And I was listening to like a mainstream news channel, and they were like, okay, well, Bashar al-Assad has fallen, and now we don't know who's going to be in charge yet, because this was a couple days ago. And they're like, the problem we're worried about right now is that since Bashar al-Assad protected the minorities in the country, we're worried that somebody's not going to protect the minorities now. And I'm like, wait, is this guy the bad guy? Bashar al-Assad, is he the bad guy? He's the guy protecting minorities?
Yeah.
Is he the bad guy? So basically, I'm going to put a reference below that I found, and it's the top 8 reasons why this guy's the most evil scumbag in the world. And when you look at it, I feel like a lot of them are ridiculous. Like, the number one is 191,000 people died during the Civil War, right? He's getting invaded by foreigners, right?
Uh-huh.
If I was getting invaded by foreigners, I would try to quadruple that number, right?
Oh, for sure.
And then number 2 is like torture, right? Listen, I've got this theory. I don't know what you think about this, but I think there's 2 different standards of warfare, right? If you're invading somebody for some reason, there's certain standards of things you have to do, right? Mm-hmm. Where you're governed by international law. If you're being invaded, I don't care if you use claw, scratch, bite, throw dirt in my eyes. I don't really care what you do, because you're fighting for your sovereignty of your own people, you know? Mm-hmm. So the defender, I don't put as much moral, compulsion on, of what their behavior has to be. So if you're torturing foreigners who come into your country, I just don't come into his country and attack them, right? Turks,
Can
US,
I mention
Israel.
something on that?
Yeah.
I completely disagree. I'm just joking. So, I mean, a good example that shows the hypocrisy of that argument too is look at what's going on in Ukraine. If any of you on the show remember Gonzalo Lira, he was a Chilean-American journalist. Have you heard of him?
Yeah, for sure. I followed that story.
Yeah. So he's been tortured. He's been, like, he talked about his whole experience, and he had video of these. So basically, when the Russians got captured by some Azov battalions, there's video of them like being pulled out of a van and just shot, like not in the head necessarily, just places, like it's on camera. And Ukraine, like, it's all over as far as Ukraine torturing Russians and everything, but it's also backed up by the West. They're basically saying, well, Putin's invading a sovereign country, so they deserve it, basically. So, yeah, it's hypocritical.
That's hilarious, because on the one side they say it's allowed, but then for Bashar al-Assad it's not allowed, even though he's getting invaded by the very people who are saying that it's okay for Ukraine to do it. So I think that's interesting. So basically, you can check the reference below, and you can go look at the list of things. The chemical attack, we know that chemical attack didn't happen during Trump's time. That was obviously fake at the time, right? And then there's, barrel bombs. You can go look at the ridiculous list. And so from what I gather, I don't know if he was a terrible person or not. I know that he was a tough guy, and he used his security forces when he needed them, right? It definitely wasn't a democracy, but also he protected the minorities in the country. So my question to you is, looking forward at the future of Syria, does the future look bright for Syria?
Not in the near future.
I feel like it's going to get terrible.
Yeah.
Going to be a lot of infighting, correct?
Oh, for sure. Especially now that there's not a strong leader to at least keep things somewhat under control. Did you hear about what happened to Assad after he escaped?
Oh, I heard he went to Russia. That's all I know. Moscow.
Yeah, he landed in Moscow. There were rumors floating around his plane got shot down, so I thought he might have had a similar thing to what happened with Prigozhin, the Wagner group leader. but apparently they just shut off the transponder and he landed.
Oh, I see.
So he'll probably be like, one of those leaders in exile for a while at least.
Did you see the video of what's that guy's name? Giuliani. What's his name? Giuliani. Abu al-Giuliani.
Al-Giuliani.
Did you see his people? And they've got all the Christians on the ground on their knees facing the wall, and they're just like putting their foot on the back of their head and just kind of mushing their face into the wall a little bit. Do you see that?
I didn't see the picture. No.
But it's like I feel like you went from a guy who would protect minorities, and now you're going with the Al Qaeda guy. I mean HTS. He's no longer affiliated with the massacres. He did himself. Right? So I just feel like I have no optimism for the future of the Syrian people.
And it's interesting, too, another parallel with Ukraine, because look at how Zelensky's been treating Christians, especially Eastern Russian Orthodox Christians. So there's two churches. There's there's a Ukrainian Orthodox church under the Moscow Patriarchate, and there's one that's an independent one, but it's got kind of some Western ties to it. But the Zelensky and the Ukrainian military's all but outlawed any form of Christianity that's they consider to be Russian influenced. So they've been persecuting Christians too.
Oh, I see. Okay, but in my opinion, that seems more justified than what's going on with what will go on in Syria.
Yeah,
because at least they're targeting an ethnic group that's invading them, right? Whereas in Syria, it's just going to be, if you're not our exact sect of, right? Or do you think I'm wrong? Because the guy's saying he's going to do the democracy. He's saying he's going to give rights to minorities after he's already done massacres in the past. I just really don't believe him.
Oh yeah, I agree with you there.
Maybe I should believe him because they address him like Zelensky, right?
Oh, that's a good point. Yeah.
Yeah, we should just probably believe him. Anyway, so what else do you got? That's kind of all the things that I wanted to cover. What are you thinking?
It reminds me too of what happened right after the revolution. Are you familiar with Kerensky?
No.
He was for those of you who don't know, between the time when the Bolsheviks, or when the Tsar got overthrown, and the time where the Bolsheviks actually came into power and it became the USSR, there was an interim government, which was run by a guy named, I believe, Alexander Kerensky. Yeah, Alexander Kerensky. Essentially, that turned Russia into a democratic republic for a very brief period of time. We're talking just a few months. But he allowed the Soviets, the Bolsheviks, to take over. Basically, he made it a lot easier for them. And that's kind of what this whole, we're going to make Syria into a democracy, it reminds me of. I
see. I think that anything that the U.S. or Israel is reporting about this is going to be nonsense. I feel like if I wanted to know what was going, this is a silly thing to say, but I feel like I would want to just go look at Al Jazeera to get a more accurate, probably still not the truth, but more accurate.
Yeah.
Okay, well, that's what we got for you. Gerron should be joining us for the rest of the episodes this week. We're just going to see how that goes because we haven't filmed them yet, but I'll put some thumbnails up on the screen if he is about the new episodes, and hope to see you there.